Okay, welcome back into another episode. So we just watched episode 4 of season 2. What were your thoughts on that episode?
It's still very much in keeping with the video game vibe where it's like, well, I guess you're stranded here, you might as well do this mission. And it also felt like the Final Fantasy VII part where they're taking out the reactors.
I think that they're trying to create Vader clones. That's my theory. Like, I've been reading that some people think that the person in the tanks or whatever, that was like the beginning stages of creating Snoke. And I guess I could see that. You saw at the end how they had those several suits of black armor. Some people were saying that those might be shadow troopers, which were basically like force-sensitive stormtroopers that had lightsabers. I could see that, but I could also see those being like an army of Vaders that they're trying to create, and that's why they're trying to get a volunteer with a high enough midichlorian count to be able to replicate force sensitivity. I think Moff Gideon wants to create himself an army of Darth Vaders. Ahsoka would be able to combat that, and I really just want to see an army of Vader clones. I think that would be sweet.
That does sound sweet, but are they making Vaders or Palpatines? Because wasn't Palpatine trying to clone himself?
Well, I don't know if Moff Gideon knows that Palpatine's still technically alive. Like, I think Palpatine the whole time was kind of in this basically lifeless vessel because he had been trying to create vessels for himself, and so he last minute transferred it into that lifeless thing that was like hanging on a coat rack. I don't know if Favreau and Filoni are going to try to bridge the gap between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. I think they're trying to distance themselves from that. And so I think that Moff Gideon would probably prefer to have somebody like Vader, who's very aggressive and powerful, especially if it's a clone that he can control. So if he had like several like slightly less powerful Vaders that had force sensitivity, he'd basically have an army of robots that could use the force and would be basically at his beck and call. He seems like that kind of leader. He seems like almost like a Tarkin type where he just wants to be aggressive and fight that way and not really super tactical and just outmuscle everybody. That's kind of the impression that I got from Tarkin, and that's kind of Vader's fighting style.
Do you think that Palpatine would be ghosting around and subtly influencing ideas like that in people? Like, ooh, you can have Vader clones, which he would then use to inhabit later on?
Disney didn't even know that they were adding Palpatine until the last minute. Like, they just kind of decided to throw him in there to try to sell tickets. So I don't think the plan was for Palpatine to be alive at this point. I think that this show is trying to stay more towards the treatment that George Lucas wanted. In the like bonus features or whatever, you can see him on set and looking at stuff, and they kind of run everything by him. So I don't know. I really hope that they're not trying to tie this in with the sequels, just because so many true Star Wars fans hate those, and I think that would just annoy people if they're trying to add on to what was a terrible trilogy. I think that they should go the route of just pretend like those never happened and move on. If that little thing in the tube that we ended up seeing, if that ends up being Snoke, I'm going to be kind of disappointed. That seems a little forced and that seems a little like too obvious. I'd rather them go with something that would have more of a shock factor, like an army of mini Vaders.
Don't they have like 20 to 30 more years to connect the A New Hope Luke Skywalker stuff to the Rise of Rey type stuff? The way people feel about the sequels now, people felt about the prequels, and they used like the Clone Show and the Rebel Show to buy back a lot of the like prequel stuff and like justify it more. I think they could be using this show and whatever like subsequent stuff to sell people on the... And there's a... Like, I think, I don't know if they still are, but as far as their like comic side, there's like Age of Republic, Age of Rebels, and Age of Resistance. So I think they're going to try to, like, prequel into some of the sequel stuff.
I think Filoni and Favreau and the people that are kind of working on this show, I think they understand the diehard, hardcore Star Wars fans operate, and I think that they would just alienate everybody that they're trying so hard to get back with focusing more on the sequels and trying to rectify those. I think they should just quit while they're behind.
They're kind of walking on eggshells no matter what. And Disney tries to do stuff that's like so big that it's like all inclusive so that it's like Hallmark music.
The casual fans are going to watch it and probably find some way to act like they enjoy it no matter what. The diehards are going to be the one they need to impress, and they need to give it the treatment that they want. You're right that Star Wars is going to probably make money no matter what it does. The diehards have a specific way they want Star Wars to be. I think they're trying to keep the diehards happy because they understand that casuals or people that only ever really watch the movies or have only seen a couple of the movies or just casually watch this show because it's easily accessible, they're not going to have as much of an opinion one way or the other. So they need to make sure that they keep the diehard fans as happy as they possibly can. There are 30 years or so of gap in between. That's why I think that maybe they're writing that into the history that Moff Gideon tried to start some sort of mini Vader army. I also think that there's eventually going to be an uprising of Thrawn again. There's a whole lot of different directions that they can go. With Marvel kind of doing the multiverse type deal, I wonder if they're going to try to figure out a way so that there's a multiverse within Star Wars.
Eventually they get to time travel, and then eventually you can just do whatever you want, go wherever you want, pull in characters from wherever you want. Do you think that Moff Gideon could just be Thrawn?
I do not, actually. Thrawn is like blue, and he's not human.
But people change appearance. In Little Mermaid, Ursula had the shell where she can like look human and not purple and squiddy. There were probably things in Star Wars where you could disguise yourself in a non-blue and non-red eye having way.
Is that what you're saying then? You think that Moff Gideon is Thrawn? Is that your official prediction?
Let's say yes.
Moff Gideon having a really impressive battle strategy and being very aggressive would kind of...
Because they're tactical and smart.
But I think that Thrawn is really more of a defensive kind of tactician, not really the type to show up and have a bunch of troopers and just like blow up the... Like in that last episode where Thrawn usually doesn't show up himself. He usually is kind of back on his capital ship and pulling the strings from there. So the way that Moff Gideon has sort of implemented his strategies doesn't really line up with Thrawn, but that being said, maybe Thrawn being bested by a group of Phoenix team and like random pirates on Lothal however long before A New Hope started, maybe that made him rethink it. I think it's kind of a stretch that Moff Gideon is the same as Thrawn, and also Moff Gideon seems to be a very cool character, so why would they give up having two separate cool characters? If they make them the same person, then they're losing out on two separate
leaving money on the table, yeah.
They have two separate cool characters, and Moff Gideon and Thrawn could very well end up teaming up at some point. I think that they think of Thrawn as like the Thanos level threat at this point, where they're working toward some sort of grand conflict. All of the remaining characters from the Galactic Republic era and the Rebels show era are going to come together and have to face off against Thrawn at some point. Do you think they would ever do some sort of crossover where it was like Marvel versus Star Wars? Because they've done Marvel DC crossovers before. Do you think they would ever...
They could very well do a comic book of that, but probably not like a show. But that would be a lot of fun.
What Star Wars characters do you think would be able to stand up to some of the... It seems like the Marvel characters are a lot more powerful. Like, the ones like Spider-Man or whatever, who doesn't have any, like... superpowers per se other than like enhanced strength and spider sense, how would he match up against somebody like a Jedi like Ahsoka?
He'd have to like bounce around and acrobat around.
That's how Ahsoka fights.
Couldn't bounce around and
That's what I'm saying.
around.
Ahsoka's got a very good agility and the Force. Could Ahsoka take out Thor? No. Could she take out somebody that's just got really good athleticism and like enhanced normal human abilities?
She kind of does that all the time.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like the most powerful Force user that the galaxy's ever seen was Anakin/Vader, and Ahsoka wasn't able to take him out on her own. She came close, but she couldn't beat him.
Well, comic book logic is very, like, it all depends who's writing it and who likes the character. When Jim Shooter is writing something, Spider-Man could take out all the X-Men by himself, and Storm is basically a god. Because Jim Shooter doesn't like the X-Men. Or women.
Do you have any theories about what that was at the end? Do you have any predictions as to what those black suits would have been at the end?
I would have just assumed that they were regular TIE Fighter pilot suits, but when you showed me it again, they do kind of look like Darth Vader-y shaped helmets.
Do you think we're going to get Ahsoka next episode?
Probably not next episode. Maybe like 7 or 8. The end of this episode marks the exact halfway point of the season, doesn't it?
Yeah, so this would be the time when, if Grace Randolph or whatever, I believe that's her name, when she came out and was the one that leaked how there was some sort of tension between Pedro Pascal and Filoni and Favreau or whatever and Lucasfilm. She said, don't be surprised if there's a complete dramatic flip of the trajectory of the show after episode 4 or so. This would have been the changing point. I noticed that Din was not in this episode that much. They made it a point for him to jet off screen for most of it. I mean, I know there was the part where it was him and the child on the ship and whatever, but then he drops off the child at school, and then he's not really that much of a focal point of the episode.
Yeah, and then it's pretty choppy when they're running around on the base. Like, it's, oh, they're running, and then, like, it cuts in weird, jumpy ways where it seems like there was probably supposed to be dialogue and, like, pauses that they got rid of.
What are your thoughts about Dr. Pershing?
Like, do I think he's still alive, or how do I think he's going to be a major character? I kind of forgot what happened to him after the first time. He just seems like regular mad scientist type, like standard mad scientist.
Well, the interesting thing about him is, like, he's got the same patch on his arm as the cloners from Kamino in Attack of the Clones. He's got that same symbol. I'm interested what kind of connection with Kamino that he has, and I'm interested to see if he himself is a clone, or if he's just somehow like a scientist from Kamino, and I'm kind of curious how much of a factor he's going to be in the show. Do you have any predictions for like what the next episode's going to be about? Do you think that we're going to get any more Boba Fett? Do you have any other thoughts if like that was for sure Boba Fett or not, or if we're going to get Rex and when? Rex and Boba Fett are really who I mainly want to get more of, and they're showing the characters that I don't really care about right now.
You were saying how they've kind of pretty much established that Rex was on Endor when they were like teaming up with the Ewoks. So I don't really see how it would be Rex. I can really see how they want you to think it's Boba Fett. And now that I think about it, they were building that whole like Black Spire theme park at Disneyland, and I think a lot of the like Resistance Age comics tie into the Black Spire and how the First Order is trying to set up an outpost there to secure the Outer Rim type areas. There was like a teaser, like a couple page teaser of like a comic preview that I didn't actually read the comic of, but some like Jabba the Hutt type gangster guy was buying a Sarlacc pit that somebody had trapped in like a room-sized jar. So that might be the Sarlacc pit that Boba Fett got eaten in, and that could be how he gets free of that.
Do you think that that character at the end of the first one, we won't officially assume that it's Boba Fett just yet. Do you think we'll get them again in this season at all, or do you think that was it?
We might get another like couple seconds of teaser of them.
How much Ahsoka do you think we're going to get?
Probably not much. Like, she'll probably show up for a couple minutes and fight a little bit and be like, oh, I was over there, and then you'll have to watch the next season for her.
Yeah, I really don't have any crazy predictions other than I'm predicting that at some point in this series the child will wield the Darksaber. And after watching that last episode, my main takeaway is that I think that they're building some sort of mini Darth Vader army, and I think that it's going to be some sort of really cool Ahsoka and probably Din and everybody else against a bunch of Force-sensitive mini Darth Vaders.
Darth Vader is kind of like a celebrity of the Empire. It would make sense that even if they don't have Darth Vaders, they would harken back to the iconography of Darth Vader to harken back to like the glory days of the Empire.
I really think it's the idea that since Vader is one of the most, probably the most Force-sensitive that they've ever seen, Gideon would have known of him, if not having worked directly with him during the main stay of when the Empire was in full power. I think he would think to himself, well, what if I just had several of this? Just like how Dr. Doom makes a bunch of Doom bots.
I don't think Dr. Doom imbues the Doom bots with his power. He just kind of designs them to look like him. But Moff Gideon is definitely smart enough to know to use Darth Vader as a symbol, like to use the like image of Vader to inspire fear.
It seems like Moff Gideon's tactics are kind of similar to Dr. Doom, though. And so this cloning process is going to be kind of similar. It'd really be a better version of the Doombot, so to speak. And it would still be cool if it ends up being those shadow troopers or whatever. That would still be kind of cool.
It's kind of like how we put George Washington on everything. We're not trying to clone George Washington, but we put his face everywhere. Darth Vader is like the George Washington of the Empire at this point.
Do you think that we would get any more Luke Skywalker or anything? And do you think they would cast the same actor that played Bucky / Winter Soldier
As Luke Skywalker?
Yeah, I heard that they were going to cast him as a younger version of Luke Skywalker because Mark Hamill isn't the young version of Luke Skywalker anymore. So I heard some sort of rumors that guy was going to play Luke Skywalker.
Like slightly older than Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker?
Yeah. I don't know if that's true or not, but I read online that some people were at least fan casting that guy.
That seems
Sebastian Stan.
very, very speculative.
Well, because they also kind of tried to nail home that the Skywalker era was wrapped with the Rey ones. So I think they're trying to explore other characters. It's an interesting thought because Sebastian Stan does kind of look like him a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. He looks more like Anakin, I would say, than Luke. Yeah, I didn't think they were going to use Luke. Because he, they don't... There's always these little, sub-side stories that they mine out from, wherever. And, interim things. But I thought he, went into hiding more or less. And although I guess they were flashing back to, him training Leia, too.
Well, the whole him going into hiding would have been probably not quite, because I think the New Republic was thriving for a little bit, and he had started a new generation of Jedi and was training them, and that was the whole point, was Leia and Han sent Kylo / Ben Solo to train with Luke, and then he tried to kill him, apparently, and then that's what really sparked everything.
I think in the books and the legends, he goes off and gets married and he has a kid and he has a couple apprentices and he joins the dark side for a little bit. But I don't know how much of that they're keeping.
Disney basically said none of that is canon. I'm hoping that some of the legend stuff that has been erased from canon, I almost hope they reintroduce that as canon, because I think a lot of the hardcore Star Wars fans really like those extended universe stories. That would be cool if they just sort of tell Kathleen Kennedy and some of these other Disney executives that don't really care for Star Wars, they don't understand what a Star Wars story is supposed to be, and they don't really have a grasp on what Star Wars fans want to indulge themselves in, I guess. I'm hoping that the Favreaus and the Filonis are given free reign to sort of reintroduce some of the extended universe stuff and make it canon, and maybe not make it exactly the same, but they've already kind of been adding elements of what's now considered legends into the canon timeline. So I hope they do kind of recanonize some of the extended universe stuff. I think that's the direction they should really go, is put some of the extended universe content onto the small screen or big screen, instead of trying to beat a dead horse and I guess almost fix the atrocity that was the sequels. I think they should really just ignore those, treat it like it's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Treat it like it's its own thing. It's its own, I guess, universe. It's its own kind of separate, and retcon it from the canon timeline and focus more on the characters people actually like.
Well, I think when they do stuff like Rogue One and Solo and all the little offshoot one-shot things, I think they're trying to build it into a whole world where there is something for everybody. And I think that's why Star Wars is so has become such a ubiquitous thing, because it's you can get into the soap opera of the characters, or the philosophy of the Force and the Jedi and blah blah blah, and the politics of it, or you can just the costumes, or you can just the kooky creatures, or you can just the ships, or it's big enough, it's a big enough umbrella so that you can pull something out of it that you find cool.
There was supposed to be at least one more Solo movie, but it got scrapped because the first one tanked so hard. And that's what I'm saying.
And a lot of people say that one tanked so hard because episode 8 was so terrible.
Well, anyway, that's going to wrap up this episode. That fourth episode was pretty good. All of them have been better than that second episode so far. I still think the one with Bo-Katan was cooler than this most recent one, but I like this most recent one. I think it's probably my second favorite so far. out of the 4. I'm interested to see what kind of tangent it goes off on, because there was speculation that I still buy that there was some sort of falling out with the cast and that the show could easily just go in a completely different direction from here on. According to the speculative report, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, it starts off a certain way and then it totally just does a 180 after about the 4 episode mark of the season 2 of The Mandalorian. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can always catch episodes of the podcast on Spotify and Apple. You can always interact with the podcast on Facebook and Twitter at NES9. Catch you in the next one.